All right. Church, well, it is a pleasure to be back up and sharing with you again. Nothing like having a great, uplifting series from Hector and then talking about something like serving right afterwards. And I've really started digging into serving because when you think about it, it's kind of countercultural and controversial in our culture today. If you think about it outside of the church, you think of serving, servanthood, it really has a negative connotation to it, even the word servant. You kind of say it and it has a down meaning to it. And I really, didn't understand why. One thing that really jumped out to me in the popular world is in 2014, Kevin Durant, before all the scandal with Twitter, before jumping onto a super team and really being thought of as a coward and a snake in the grass, he was a pretty stand-up guy in the NBA, and he was conducting an interview with an online website called Grantland. And the person was interviewing him, and he said, what do you think about the nickname the Slim Reaper? Because that's what people had started calling him. And he said, I really don't like that. I want to be called the servant, because I'm here to shine a bright light. And that kind of fizzled out like a sparkler. They did not react very well. He became the joke of the sports media for a few weeks. Like, why would anybody want to, be called the servant? And he eventually backed down and said, I was just kidding. Just call me KD. That was a joke. I just wanted to see what people would say. So, even my own reaction, I was like, man, that's kind of a soft nickname. Why would you want to have something like that? You have so many better names out there. Why? And so that really started me off on my path of what do we have against serving? Why is it so, such a taboo thing in our culture? And it hit me. We're living in America, the land of opportunity. Serving goes against the American dream, where you can just roll up your sleeves, you can work hard and be your own boss. It's all good, but when you take away all the fluff, all the tapestry, everything after that, what does that idea of the American dream really mean? You can work hard so you don't have to serve anyone else. Don't get me wrong, I'm very thankful to be an American. I'm thankful for this country. I'm thankful for the freedoms that we have. I'm thankful that we can meet on a Sunday. You guys can listen to me and not have to worry about the military coming in and arresting us. We're not tortured or killed for our faith. But in reality, this country is a nation obsessed with freedom. We want our freedom of speech, freedom to bear arms. We want to love who we want to love, identify how we want to identify. We want to be our own people. We want to find our own way in and fight our own way out, regardless of what the Bible has to say. In reality, we are a nation that has literally become enslaved to freedom. And that brings me to my main verse for today, Matthew 6:24. None is able to serve two lords, for he will either hate the one and love the other, or he'll hold to the one and despise the other. You're not able to serve God and mammon. And I took the verse from Young's literal translation. There are a few different translations out there that says, you can't serve God and money, you can't serve God and mammon with a lowercase m, and Young's literal has it with a capital M. You can't tell because of the layout of my slides here, everything is in capital, but they translate it with a capital M, almost like it's a person or a being, the same way that you would talk about a deity. And, Jesus really spoke to people's hearts. He didn't just talk on the surface of, okay, you really have to focus on one. You can't split yourself. But he talked down right into people's very souls. We are hardwired, hard-coded in our DNA that we want to serve something. We find something to identify and put on that shelf. And Jesus is saying, you can't have two. So before we continue on, what is mammon really? It's just another name for money, right? Actually, it was originally an ancient Chaldean word which has its roots in confidence. So how ironic is that? And I'm going to have a little pop quiz. We're going to be a little more interactive today. Who was originally from the Chaldean area? Does anybody know? That's right. Abraham. So how about that? That a word that came from the father of our faith's land originally meant confidence turned to something that we can put up on that pedestal. So let's go back and take a closer look at Matthew 6:24. No one can serve two masters, because you'll either hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. Until I really began preparing my sermon for this, I was just like, okay, that makes sense. That's fine. And I looked at it and just took it as is. And then I realized my mistake. Why would you hate something that you're choosing to serve? What sense does that make to anyone? So I studied more and more about the background and the context of this. So Jesus was using a style of teaching called amplification and clarification to really say that you'll love one and you'll regard the other a little less. We see that in Romans, quoting Malachi 1, 2, and 3. Just as it is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. So to put it more in the context for our culture here today, it'd be, you can't serve two masters because you like the one and you like the other. Or maybe, you make the one your 1A and the other is your 1B. And again, I never really thought much about it that, okay, that's fine as long as you put, God number one. What does it matter if you have a 1A, a 1B, if you like God and you just like something else? And it really hit me one day when I was, driving into work that, it violates laws we've seen established in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The first commandment that was ever given up on the mountain, God said to Moses, you'll have no other gods before me. There's Jesus calling that out right here. Cannot serve two masters. And then Jesus himself says in the New Testament, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to God except through me. So when we go back and take a closer look in Matthew 6:24, really Jesus is saying no one can serve two masters. You cannot serve both God and blank. We can fill in the blanks here about what we want to put in. We can't serve both God and whatever. So what are some ways that we can choose to serve mammon? Going through the list, I came up with several. Not listening to the conviction of the Holy Spirit. God can tell us to move. God can tell us to do this. God can call us somewhere. We saw a wonderful example of this last week when Hector was talking about God giving him that new calling to shut down his old ministry and go in a different direction. As Hector mentioned, he took that. We have the option to say to God, no, I don't want to do that. The author of Hebrews wrote in chapter 3, verse 7, today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as you did during the rebellion. So if we choose to not listen to the conviction of the Holy Spirit, not only are we hardening our hearts, but we're also rebelling against God. Another way is hoarding our resources. I fully believe everything that Jesus talked about in the Bible, every word that he said was purposeful and intentful. One of the most common things he spoke about outside of the kingdom of heaven is about money. And the reason for that is because it's something that we very easily can put our confidence in. It's very easy to say, okay, if I have enough money in my bank account, I don't need to trust in God. Or if I have enough revenue stream coming in, I'm set, I don't need to worry. But really, that's taking God out of his role as number one in our lives. And it was tough for me growing up. My family was not well off. We lived comfortably, but we were not keeping up with the Joneses by any means. And my uncle was a very successful doctor. His wife worked for a number of years. My cousins, they had everything that they wanted, the latest and greatest of everything. So, my natural instinct was to be jealous, to want to keep up, and I grew up with, hoarding, hustling, looking for ways around the system to try to get ahead with what little that I had. And that was very much putting putting money first above God and offsetting our spiritual commandment that we want to give. Another way we can do that is getting caught up in the affairs of this world. For anybody here who's had a conversation with me for more than about 20 minutes, you'll know that I'm an unapologetic basketball fan. I love the Boston Celtics. All right. Even as I was preparing my notes, buying League Pass was probably the worst thing I've ever done because I had a game in the background and the Celtics played 3 times this week. So it was tough trying to focus to get my thoughts together. They were 3-0, by the way, this week. Just putting that out there. And there's nothing wrong with being a fan or having interests or having things that you're passionate about. But Romans 12:2 warns us to not be conformed to the world, but to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, that you may prove what is good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Another way that we get caught up in mammon is by doubting God. How many times, and raise your hand here if you've ever been in a situation where things looked bleak, where things looked like they were tough, and you prayed, but you didn't really have any faith behind your prayers. I know I have. Okay. So that's about as effective as praying up to the ceiling and watching them bounce back down to you. And, James 1:6 tells us, when you pray, when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because he who doubts is like a wave of the sea tossed to and fro by the wind. So that's another way we're putting God as second. All right. Now this next one is a little tough. Aaron, you good with me? I'm talking about your favorite subject right now.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, good. Because you can earmuffs. I'll let you know when it's safe. If not fasting and praying. So, Gary has mentioned in previous sermons that fasting is a spiritual dynamite that helps us break through a situation. That's the things that when nothing else comes through, you pray and you fast. Jesus spoke to his disciples one time when they were trying to cast out a demon and said, Lord, why can't we cast out this demon? What are we doing differently than you are? And Jesus looked at them and said, because sometimes this has to come from fasting and prayer. And what is one of the things that, just our natural bodies, they want to eat. They want to indulge. Our flesh likes to be taken care of. And it's the natural instinct. I know every time that I fast, it's always like, okay, well, I'm going to fast this meal. What time is dinner? We're living for the flesh. But every time we purposefully and intentfully fast and we pray and we set that time aside, we're putting our bodies on the altar and we're saying, I'm going to follow you, God. I'm going to put away all the distractions and I'm going to look to you. All right. You good? You still with me, Aaron? All right. Good. We're going to move along. The last thing that I came up with is using our spiritual gifts for personal gain. I'm going to quiz you guys again because Josh talked about this recently. Who are spiritual gifts meant to benefit? How'd they do, Josh? All right. You guys passed. You guys all can have an extra cupcake at the end. So for anybody listening on the website or listening on YouTube, if you come to the service, you get goodies for paying attention. So,
Unless you're fasting.
And then you're serving God first. I want to give you guys a couple of illustrations, and I have a video after the slide that if it works, wonderful. Hopefully that gives something for you, and if not, then I'll talk through it. Raise your hand if you've ever seen one of these things. That's right, that's an elephant. So a drawing of an elephant. So whenever we go to the zoo, I am always absolutely and positively amazed by 2 animals, lions and elephants. You hear both of them from, across the zoo. And elephants especially, they are just mammothly powerful creatures. But if you look at this elephant here, it's tied to the ground with a rope and a stake. Now, when an elephant is small, you can train them to not move past that length by taking a chain, wrapping it around its leg, and putting a metal stake into the ground. And as that baby elephant tries to move, that chain will dig into its leg. That chain will bring him pain, it will cut its leg, and the elephant will never forget that. So when this elephant grows up, when it becomes a powerful beast like we see at the zoo, that could easily push down a tree without trying, a toothpick of a wooden stake and a small rope can keep it forever chained up. Just so everybody knows, no elephants were harmed in the drawing of that picture. All right. Would somebody mind dimming the lights for just a minute? All right.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So, isn't that amazing? For training fleas, by putting them in a jar, by containing them, by enslaving them for 3 days, that has an impact on them. And isn't that, I want to say cool, but isn't that something how God can use the natural to parallel the spiritual? And I want to give everybody a warning. The seeds we don't take care of become the vines that enslave us. We have a tree in our backyard. It's not a weeping willow, but it looks very similar to that. It's got the long dangling leaves, and it's just a very cool-looking tree. At some point, because I'm very meticulous about taking care of my yard, I like everything perfect, I like my gardens looking great, de-weeded everything. All right, I'm done telling stories now. That's not true. You guys know me too well. So I'm not very skilled, I'm not very gifted with gardening. It's not really my strong suit. So one day I'm out in my yard and I'm looking at the tree and I said, man, that's a good looking tree. It's got a nice little canopy of leaves. It's really doing healthy. It's really healthy. The leaves are looking nice and green and it just goes down to the ground. That's such a cool spot. That's really nice. And my neighbor came over who is a little bit more, has a little bit more of a green thumb and knows a little bit more about most things than I do. Said, Larry, that is a vine that's growing all along this tree here, and it's choking out your tree, and if you don't get that taken care of, your tree's going to die. And I said, really? No, that's not. The tree is growing. Look, the leaves are right on top. It's fine. So he brought me over, and he said, no, look, there's the vine right there coming this way along your fence. It's going to take out your fence. It'll take out the tree. It'll probably take out the pole right behind there. So I had to do what I love to do, roll up my sleeves and get to work. My dad came over. We brought more power tools than I knew what to do with, things I had never worked with. And we spent a good 3 or 4 hours hacking and cutting and chainsawing and using alligator cutters, everything to get this thing that started off as a small seed, a small blade, became something that was about yay thick around, I could stand on, my dad could stand on, and eventually, made a pretty big pile to be burned. All because one seed didn't get taken care of. And then even afterwards, after I thought I killed it, it started growing back in other spots. So we need to be careful about the things that we're not taking care of, because the impact isn't just on us. It has a generational impact on our families, our children, and our communities. And we're going to take a look quickly at 3 examples of that. The first one is King Saul offering a sacrifice instead of waiting for Samuel in 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 14. Looking at King Saul, I really think that he decided to serve his own anxieties and his own fears at that time. They were waiting for the prophet. They were waiting for Samuel. The men were getting restless. They were like, hey, is this going to happen? Is God really with us? What's going on? And Saul was wondering, hey, are my enemies going to rise up against me and conquer us? What's going on here? Where's Samuel? Is he gone? Is he dead? Maybe I should just take this over, put everybody's mind at ease, and offer the sacrifice to God. The Bible says right after that was done, Samuel arrived. And what was the impact on Saul? He lost the kingdom. That right there, if you had to put a freeze frame, that's the minute that Saul lost his anointing and lost his kingdom. His successor didn't do much better. King David, a man after God's own heart, but he had an affair with another man's wife that led to a division in his family and his kingdom. I don't want to talk badly about David because, again, he is talked about even after this as a man after God's own heart. He was God's anointed king. But I wonder what he was thinking. I wonder if he sat back around that time when it became spring, when kings went to war, and he said, you know what? I'm God's anointed one. God called me from a young age. He's done this for me. He's done that for me. I've paid my dues. I wonder if he said, I've been successful. I've been blessed. I can sit back and I can have my generals and my armies. They can take care of that for me. I don't need to get my hands dirty anymore. But because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, he wasn't being a king going out to war as kings do in that time, he led to bad decisions that cost him his kingdom. And then lastly, in the New Testament, Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5, 1 through 11. I wonder if they had a spirit in them similar to the Pharisees that Jesus talked about when they were giving, and they made a whole big production of giving their offerings. They could have been blessed just for giving. They weren't required to do anything at all. They didn't have to sell their land, their house, and give it. They felt led to. But instead of just saying, hey, we sold this and here's part of it, we're going to keep the rest for ourselves, I said, no, here's the whole thing. Look at what we did. Look at how great we are. Aren't we wonderful? And it cost them their lives. So what do you think, church? Did they have the spirit of giving? I'd have to doubt that as well. The good thing is, I talked about 3 bad examples. We have a better example. And I love it. In Matthew 20, 24 to 28, the story talks about the sons of thunder, how they had said, hey, who is going to be on Jesus' left hand and who's going to be on his right? And this is probably one of the most real stories. I like the Message version of both because it's repeated here in Matthew and in Mark, just about word for word. The Bible gets real. The disciples, they were ticked at these 2 kiss-ups. They got tired. They were tired of them brown-nosing, rubbing elbows with Jesus all the time, trying to be the 2 top. And again, Jesus pulled them in the room and he said, listen, knock it off, cut it out. If you guys want to be great, here's what you have to do. Whoever wants to be first must be your slave. This is what the Son of Man is doing here. He came to serve and not to be served, to give away this life in exchange for many who are held hostage. Again, Jesus, very purposeful, very intentful. He got his disciples in check right there and said, if you want to lead, this is what you got to do. Don't worry about who's the best here. Serve one another in your time. As you can mention here, it's in Matthew 20, 24 to 28, and again in Mark 10, 41 through 45. So how can we serve? In Philippians 2, 3 through 4, the NIV says, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you to the interest of others. As I was preparing this sermon, I got reminded of a story. When I was growing up, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. We didn't go to church. But a friend of mine turned me on to WZXV The Word, the Calvary Chapel radio network. So I grew up in my Christian faith in the Calvary Chapel movement. Because I lived in Greece, Calvary Chapel of Greece became my de facto show that I needed to listen to, and Bob Chappell became my de facto pastor. Bob has since gone on to be with the Lord. One day he was teaching about humility and always being in prayer, and he gave an example that I had forgotten about for a good 10 years. He talked about doing the little things that people take for granted, the things that people don't do, and he talked about changing the roll of toilet paper and always being in prayer and say, when you're down and you're praying, change that roll of toilet paper, keep in prayer, and you're serving other people. So I was young, I was enthusiastic of a Christian, and I wanted to share everything that I had learned. So I ran to my dad, who had just got done working in the yard, all day, and I said, "Man, Dad, this is what Pastor Bob said. When you're changing the toilet paper roll, you should be praying, and this and that, and something else." And my father didn't mince words. All right, my dad was straight to the point. Didn't always have compassion, but he told it like it is. He said, 20 years ago this conversation happened. I still remember it word for word. "Well, why aren't you in the yard helping me with my work, and you can be out praying there?" And I was like, "Well, you want to know the truth? Because I don't want to." I did not tell the truth in love that day, but I was looking to my own interest, and I was doing that out of selfish ambition. Another example of how we can serve. For dear brothers, you have been given freedom, not freedom to do wrong, but freedom to love and serve each other. Galatians 5:13 from the Living Bible. So we are a nation that has a freedom, right? So we can take our freedom to help other people and to serve one another, not to serve our own interests. So I'm going to ask a closing question, and I'm going to put out a challenge to everybody. Realistically, why should we serve? Take the church out of it, take the church speak out of it, and let's get real. Why should we serve other people? Why should we go out of our own way to do something for other people? And I really want you guys to think about this, not just today, but through the rest of the week. I was going to say come with some ideas next Sunday, but we have our joint service, so I'm going to extend a real big challenge to everybody here. In 2 weeks, when we're back here, I want you guys to think about why we should serve, and maybe if somebody or somebodies are feeling brave, come up during the sharing time and tell us what God has put on your heart. I'll tell you what I got from it, my answers for it, but really, I want to hear what God has given you guys. So my answer, first and foremost, carry one another's burdens, and in this you'll fulfill the law of Christ, from Galatians 2. So we serve to fulfill the law of Christ. Then my other answer, we remove a burden from someone else so they are free to carry God's blessing. So sometimes I come home late from work. I try to leave. I have about 50 to 70 people on any given day that report to me or through me, and I try to say goodbye to everybody. And as you're leaving, that's when people have the important questions that they couldn't ask you, for the previous 9 hours. Or something comes up that I need to get taken care of before I go. So I'll come home from work, and my wife has already taken care of dinner with, the boys, and they've eaten. And raise your hand if you've ever raised a small child or been a small child. Jack Donahue's the only one. The kids want what they want when they want it, regardless of what's going on. And sometimes I'll try to do the dishes just so my wife can relax. Having to take care of 2 high-energy kids all day wears on you. Do you think my kids like that? No, not at all. They don't understand. So Judah will say, "No, well, I don't want to do that. I want you to come play, come run around, come do something else." And I said, "Well, buddy, I'm going to serve Mommy. I'm going to do the dishes so that she can read a book or knit or play guitar or do something else. I'm going to serve her because it's important that we help other people out." So far, that hasn't sunk through, but maybe one day, I'm hoping. So it takes time and consistency. Just like taking out the bad seeds, you need to be consistent. You have to be consistent with watering the good seed, with providing good soil, taking care of it, giving it light, food, energy. So for all those times that the single guys without kids are hanging out with the husbands and the kids so the wives can go out and relax and get away, you're helping serve. You're taking a burden from someone else so they can carry God's blessing. For the people who stay behind to clean up church every week, you're doing the same thing. And dare I even say the people who step out of their comfort zone to come up and share, to give something to us that God has put on their heart. You never know what the impact you're having on someone else. You could be taking somebody's burden away so that they can carry God's blessing. And then my last and final answer, I promise. I've been hanging around Bill Clark too much. I've had 3 or 4 closings now. This is the last one, I promise. We answer why we serve. It's for the ultimate goal. And that goal was Jesus' prayer. The glory that you have given me, I have given to them, that they may be one even as we are one. From John 17:22. So church, that's my take on choosing to serve and why we serve. I look forward to hearing in 2 weeks what everybody else has to say about what God has given you as to why we serve.